kind of, it's more of a community, I think, and that's what podcasting is, I think, like helping each other out. Also tagging things. If you're talking about a specific thing, like so you're talking about like Lord of the Rings or whatever, then make sure that you put that in. Then when people are searching for particular things on the internet, it'll pop up, be like, oh, you're talking about Lord of the Rings, what's this podcast? Let's check it out. Cool. Yeah.
I guess recently I've been kind of I've had a lot of fun in podcast groups, She Podcast Movements group, a couple others. So like, I had this question, I'm like, how come there isn't a Portland podcast community? I'm like, I guess I should probably join it instead of complaining anymore. And so I started Podcast Portland last week, and one of the reasons that I bring that up is not like, oh, I did something, because I think anyone could have done that, but most importantly, like being able to share shows in like certain threads. So like on each of those places, we're sharing information, we're sharing our shows. You know, I'll go through on She Podcast, there's a weekly thread. On like podcast websites, there's a weekly thread. On Podcast Movement, they're starting to have this weekly thread. I can go through and I can find shows that seem interesting to me that I can follow, people I can network with. And like that has been really fun, because in the podcasting community itself, to be able to meet other like podcasters, because it's been really fun. I spend way too much time like going on podcast pages and giving advice and helping ideas and reading stuff. But I've also started doing YouTube videos and live streaming on Facebook Live. So I decided to make a decision to myself this year. Currently I'm doing a podcast a day. It's the worst podcast, but I'm doing it every day for Podcast Month. And then that's been interesting, because it's made me kind of think a lot about like what kind of content I want to create, because I've usually kind of taken myself out of my shows a little. And so being able to step into that's been fun. And then the Monday Night Live shows have been interesting, because it gives a moment for people that are out there who listen to the show to have commentary, to make notes. And I've been able to finally connect to audiences that way. But it's also helped connect me to audiences in other cities, musicians in other cities, just being like, send me stuff, send me stuff. And it is a slow roll, because at first, you know, it's like Facebook doesn't want to put out your videos. You know, like in general, they just don't. So it's like, it's doing a lot of little things and not inundating everyone at the same time. So like my newsletter goes out, like I write an article and it comes out the week later. You know, it's like you choose the links that you have and you sort of spread them out as much as you can and just keep doing it. Because what you won't always realize is that in the first episode you might get so many listens, but when you put the second one out, you get listens on both podcasts. It just keeps on building. And so all of a sudden you start building numbers, not just from the new episode that came out, but because people start streaming back, and then they go and they're like, oh, this is interesting, and then it kind of builds on itself. And so that's what I'm experiencing. The show just launched again. It was like a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. So I'm in the process of rebuilding, and the Kickstarter really helped. But I was quiet for like 8 months. I almost quit, because it was really taxing to do weekly, and I had to get healthy, and I had to figure out how I wanted to do it so that it was maintainable. And that's been really fun, because actually that's really resonated with people who follow the show, and the show has taken on a huge curve of like self-care, and I didn't even mean to do it, but I recorded these interviews over 6 months. Every time I talked to somebody, I was like, how are you doing this? Because, you know, in arts, in so many of the things that we're doing, you're looking at situations where there's just not as much funding for anything. Like, you know, we work for minimum wage, and most, like, even as a person who's like growing up, there's just not as many jobs, professional jobs, but we still want to connect, and that connection's becoming even stronger, I think, in the last year, because how else do we survive when the Facebook and the internet does all the things? We want to connect with other people, and that's what podcasting allows us to do.
It's an opinion question, with podcasting being relatively new, but I've heard 11 years, 1 year, 8 years, different things. Do you think anything is saturated already? Like, no one should talk about this again, ever. But I mean, that's
people
extreme,
always,
but.
Yeah, people always say that though, and it's like, stop me, you know? If you don't want to listen to it, and I understand the idea of saturation, but it's like, we tagged all of our stuff, you know, where like our tagline is 2 women, 1 topic, and a shitload of tangents, you know, and then like, you know, we cover true crime, weird history, medical oddities, all that stuff. So right there, if you're bored, I have a feeling people are starting to get a little oversaturated with like true crime stuff. I don't care, I'm still gonna talk about it, but now you know, if you don't want to listen to the show, don't listen to the show.
Well, that's the thing, I don't think that the topic itself is oversaturated,
Yeah.
because people can talk about the same thing in different ways.
Exactly.
So, I mean, yeah, just because there's, multiple geek podcasts, it doesn't mean that somebody's not saying it in a way that's unique.
And that's what interests me about podcasting, and that there is so much of that content exploring one theme, is that we all experience the world differently.
Mhm.
We all have different opinions, and I'm interested in what those opinions are. If I wasn't, I'd just crawl into the woods and live in a log, and I would never have to interact with anybody. And it's extremely appealing sometimes, but for the most part, I do want to know how other people live their lives and how they experience the world.
I also think that things go in waves, and comedians were really early adopters of podcasting. Like there was a moment when every comedian you ever knew of had a podcast. And I don't know if that's still necessarily happening.
I think
it
it
is
is.
still be. But what's interesting is musicians were super late to the game. Like musicians themselves have not gotten into podcasting until just very, very recently. And just in this last year, I've seen more podcasts by musicians, which is really weird. Like I don't know why that was, but it's like they were super late to the game, and now kind of everyone's like, oh shit, I can have a podcast too.
Do you think it's that
They're lazy motherfuckers who don't like to work.
I
didn't know that.
Touching it.
I didn't say that.
No, I almost wonder if it's like, so if you're a working musician who is making the lion's share of their money off of it, do you think it's just like, if I look at another microphone on my off hours, I'm going to vomit?
I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't. I have no idea. I think it was just something that was like slightly divorced from that community. And there were a lot of people doing podcasts about music and about musicians, but musicians themselves kind of just didn't get into it until.
Well, comedians just talk. Like your job is to talk,
Well, right,
and then you
exactly.
want to talk more. If you did a movie that's sponsored by AT&T, you probably didn't get to talk about the stuff you wanted to talk about.
Exactly. You talk your own talk. Yes.
What is the number one way that you monetize your podcast? Like, I'm assuming some of this is you're not full-timers, or all of you are full-time podcasters.
I'm a full-time podcaster. We do it an hour a day, 5 days a week. We just did our, something ridiculous, our 1900th show. That sounds so fucking stupid. All right, anyway.
Oh no, you've got this huge body of work
I
you worked
know.
really hard on. Shame, Sarah.
It always freaks me out too when someone's like, oh, I'm listening to episode 37. I'm like, oh God. I don't even know where it was at that point. But for monetizing, so we have a live stream that we do, and we have a subscription base. So people pay like $6.99 a month. The first week is free if you want to do it. And basically you can listen to all of the podcasts on our network for that amount. We also have exclusive content we put out on there. We sell merch. We have sponsors. We do a lot of events that are sponsored as well. So like we're doing a Portland Podcast Festival actually coming up on December 2nd. And so we will get people to sponsor that as well as, sponsor the show, like different things. But the live stream is the exclusive content that helps.
I've gotten grants. I've kickstarted. I have a Patreon. I've had advertisers. I work in audio. I write for a magazine. A lot of different ways. I have merch that I'll be selling. It's just, I come from the perspective of music, because in that you book as many streams of income as you possibly can, and that's something I've seen in the podcast forums as well, and everyone who's doing it. There's lots of different ways that you can make money and that you're bringing in money through podcasting. Don't do one, do them all.
Bitches readers supported, but our podcasts do have sponsors. That's my input for that question.
We're doing the Patreon. I was gonna finesse the situation, Kaila, but all right. I mean, we are pretty new. So we've got 3 patrons on our Patreon, but that to me is thanks. But I'm not too worried about it. She has a job. I have my own career. That it's almost like this is fun for us, but we take it seriously. It's kind of relaxing to just sit around.
It's almost like our own personal therapy session every week.
Yeah.
Where we just get to talk about messed up stuff because it makes us feel better about ourselves.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean I've been pretty open about this. I take a shitload of Zoloft, and I think people either you kind of react to things like anxiety, where you keep yourself safe and you avoid triggers and things that upset you. And then there are lunatics like me who fling themselves into the broken glass strewn field of just the worst stuff, because like it happens and pretending that it doesn't upsets me more. So I wanted to have an avenue where we could frankly discuss it, even laugh about it, because that's kind of the only thing you can do in some situations. And I know that there are other people that react that way to anxiety or fear, you know. It's shining a light in the dark corner, and it turns out that it's not a murderer, it's just a mop with a bucket over it.
And I have 2 sponsors, and then I also, have a business that helps.
I think you have to have about like 40 different hustles if you want to do anything in media.
Yeah, so good. I think we're at time. We might have time for one more quick question if anyone has a quickie.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is coming from like finding your voice with the internet full of trolls. Maybe that's like really the seed of it. But specifically for Sarah, and then anyone else who wants to comment, describe, if you could, like loosening up from radio and the restrictions that you had around that kind of broadcasting to take on any topic and do your thing. How did you find your voice from there?
Yeah, that was, I think the hardest thing for me, it still is. I still like almost want to reach for the dump button, because when people swear sometimes, it still freaks me out. Yeah, so I think that was the thing, is like being able to say what we wanted to say without being moderated for a particular amount of time. It's like, right, you only get 3 minutes to talk, and then you have to play a Nickelback song. And it's like, that was awful. So you had to condense whatever you wanted to say into like such a small pocket of time. I think with podcasting, it's been a fun lesson to find out like what's too much on one topic and then what's too little, like to kind of find the balance with that. But the freedom that it comes, not having to sit in program director meetings, not being yelled at for like not playing 12 songs an hour, talking about books too much. We were yelled at before. It's just nice to be able to have control over what you want to say and how you want to say it.
I want that story later.
Yeah. Oh, it's good.
I saw one more quick question.
No, I want the bookstore.
No,
how can you talk about books?
Why are you telling me about that word stuff? That's the word
It was a
stuff.
really old
Ear stuff.
red-faced rich guy who yelled at us, and he's just like, "Don't talk about books. You're alienating the listeners. Talk more about like some like the Kardashians or whatever." I'm like, I don't. Okay. And then we were fired soon after that. So.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today and thank my panel.